Bicycle and Art webinar on energy impacts, taking meaningful action in the midst of a crisis. This webinar is provided as part of the Arts Council England environmental programme, and we're supporting MPAs to take action on the ecological and climate crisis. My name's Becky, I'm project manager at Julie's Bicycle. I'm a white woman in my 30s with long light brown hair. I'm wearing hoop earrings and a patterned top. Before we get started, just a quick bit of housekeeping. The webinar today will be recorded, and a recording is going to be sent to everyone who registered, and it will also be made available on the JB Resource Hub. A section of the webinar today is dedicated to questions from the audience, so please do post these into the Q&A box rather than the chat function. They might get lost in the chat function, so please do remember to put them in there, and we'll cover as many of them as we can after we've heard from our two guest speakers today. We're joined by Good Energy and Brighton Energy Cooperative. So it's great to have Atlanta and James with us this morning too. We also have technical support from my colleague Vicky. If you have any technical issues, please do message Vicky directly and she'll be able to assist you. And finally, just a note on the audience today. We've got a range of different people in the audience. Some organisations might just be starting out on their sustainability journeys. Others are going to be more advanced. We have smaller organisations, large organisations and individuals. So the content should have something for everybody. So today's agenda. I'm going to be covering some of the background and context on our current energy system and how that's interconnected with issues of justice, climate, and the current energy crisis. I'm going to also be covering some solutions and ways that the arts and culture can start to act on the energy impacts and build resilience in the process. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers, and they're going to be sharing their work with us, and there'll be time for your questions with them too. So just before we get started on the main sections of the webinar, just to briefly draw your attention to some of the wider programme updates that we have from JB. So this webinar accompanies the launch of a more detailed report, which is Energy Impacts. You can find that on our resource hub, and it goes into depth and covers more of the topics than we have time to cover in today's session. We've also just launched or refreshed our policy and action plan guidelines. In October, we also enjoyed meeting with many of you at our annual summit, We Make Tomorrow, which was in Birmingham. If you missed it, you can now purchase a live stream of the event, and that's available until January on our website. We've been having a very busy time at JB, so we were also just present at COP, where we were proud to co-lead the Resilience Hub's Art, Culture, Antiquities and Heritage theme at COP27, alongside the Climate Heritage Network and International Indigenous Women's Forum. We ran 5 sessions highlighting the role of culture and creativity in solutions for climate and justice. There will be a video coming soon, so watch out via our socials for that. But in the meantime, you can read more about the outcomes on the climateheritage.org website. In terms of training opportunities, we've also got a couple of exciting opportunities that are upcoming. First of all, our Colour Green Lab, which is an introductory level climate training course for people of colour. It's running from mid-January to early March. Registration's closed tomorrow, so do be quick in applying for that if you're interested, and please do share the opportunity with people within your organisations and networks. You can contact Farah at Julie's Bicycle for, if you'd like to find out more, and she'll be able to provide you with more information. We also have a creative climate leadership course in Hawkwood in the UK starting in March. And finally, I'd also just like to quickly mention that JB partnered with Nesta and the Policy Evidence Centre to produce this report scoping in the bottom left corner there, which scopes the creative industries at large and their readiness for the net zero transition. So plenty of reading and interesting information for you there. Now on to the content of today. So we recognise that the impact of the current energy crisis on arts and culture is severe. The unprecedented rising costs of energy have the potential to threaten the survival of many arts and cultural institutions. The crisis is exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, the larger political turmoil, and the sector's recovery also from the pandemic. To escape this systemic failure, we need to reach collectively for a clean energy future, one that's free from polluting, politically and economically unstable fossil fuel regime. Temporary fixes and short-term policy interventions are not a long-term solution. The energy crisis shares the same root causes as the climate crisis. Building a fair and clean energy transition for arts and culture is also a transition to a safer global climate, and one of the most effective ways that we can take collective action. The webinar today is going to be focusing on business energy consumption and production. We won't be exploring the energy challenges faced by domestic consumers or the policy landscape for the housing sector in any detail, although there are numerous overlaps between the underlying causes of the problems facing both categories of consumer. We aim to provide information on possible solutions whilst recognising there is no one-size-fits-all to this very complex challenge. There are a number of different ways of addressing energy impacts, and we're only going to be touching on some of them in the webinar. So remember that you can read more in detail about these in the Energy Impacts report and on the Energy Impacts page of our website. So let's first consider the facts on the relationship between our consumption of energy and the climate. The energy sector is the source of around 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. To avoid the worst effects of climate change, we have to do something about the way energy is produced and consumed. But what does this mean in practice? It means that we need a radical shift and a rapid transition to renewable energy. The faster, the better. Pathways to net zero consistently warn us that if we're to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, no new development of oil and gas should take place. The transition has to also take place in a way which centres solving issues of justice. For example, insulating homes and increasing access to renewable sources of energy can be done in a way which reduces the number of people suffering from fuel poverty and prioritises those who are the most vulnerable. Justice also needs to be considered in how we procure energy and who profits from the system. Fossil fuel generated energy production and consumption has many damaging impacts on people and places globally at all stages of production and consumption. Since the Industrial Revolution, the global North has been plundering the resources of the global South, profiting the oil companies and economies of the richer, more industrialized countries. The human rights abuses committed by fossil fuel companies are multiple, from loss of human life to levels of pollution which damage land and water to the point where they're unusable for local people. Shell's exploitation of the Niger Delta is just one famous example of this. These crimes against people and planet are continuing all over the world whilst the exploitation of fossil fuels continues. Another recent example is the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is an underground oil pipeline over 1,000 miles long, which faced mass opposition due to the concerns over the impact on drinking water safety and the negative impacts on sacred indigenous lands. Despite this, the pipeline was granted exemptions from the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, and expansion and construction of the pipeline continues. Fossil fuel companies have also been funding groups whose purpose is to deny climate science. Exxon alone has funded more than 40 groups, and the industry has invested billions in lobbying to prevent any unfavourable climate laws from being implemented. A 2019 study found Chevron, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil and Total spent a combined $153 million a year lobbying to delay, control or block policies to tackle climate change. Whilst businesses face the threat of closure over sky-high bills and 2/3 of UK households predicted to be in fuel poverty by January, at the same time, the world's 7 largest oil firms in October reported profits of £150 billion so far this year. Contributing to the fossil fuel industry's success story are the subsidies directed towards fossil fuels, for example, from the banking sector. Globally, around $372 billion are spent subsidising fossil fuel producers and consumers, compared to the $100 billion spent on supporting renewable energy. These injustices need to be addressed now and throughout the transition to a clean energy future. From a global policy perspective, there remains a significant gap between greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, which cover around 90% of global emissions, and the current climate laws which are in place to achieve them, which cover only around 53% of global emissions. The picture is no different in the UK. The UK's net zero strategy, which is the key policy framework outlining how the UK intends to reach net zero by 2050, covers just a third of the UK's emissions reductions required to meet our carbon budget. Following legal challenges from a number of environmental campaign groups, a historical ruling by the High Court found the net zero strategy to be unlawful and too vague due to sufficient lack of detail in how we will meet our emissions reductions targets. The electricity sector in the UK has decarbonised more rapidly than other sectors, but this is largely due to the phasing out of coal power. There's still some way to go to meet net zero by 2050. During COP27, in the last couple of weeks, a major point of contention was between countries who wanted to commit to phasing down fossil fuels and those who wanted to commit to phasing them out. The Glasgow Climate Pact from COP26 promised to phase down unabated coal power, but India, with backing from some key developed nations, proposed that all fossil fuels should be phased out entirely. COP27 failed to build on Glasgow with new pledges or commitments in this regard. The UK energy security strategy includes ambitious promises for nuclear and offshore wind, but it allows new licensing from oil and gas and fracking, whilst there's little emphasis for onshore wind, solar and energy efficiency. Although the focus of the strategy is on security of energy supply, in reality, energy generated is owned by energy companies, not the UK. So the energy companies are free to export the energy they produce elsewhere. Unlike community-owned energy systems, which we'll be hearing more about from Atlanta later, which is a completely different model. While some arts and cultural organisations have shown leadership on reducing energy impacts, overall the sector has been impacted by this wider lack of policy frameworks, funding and investment to support the sector in installing energy efficiency measures, retrofitting buildings and deploying low carbon and renewable energy solutions. So why are we in the midst of an energy crisis? The current global energy crisis is caused by an ongoing shortage of energy generated by natural gas, which has resulted in prices soaring to record-breaking levels. This is due to a number of factors. First of all, security of supply. So the uncertainty in sourcing of supplies from Russia, causing wholesale energy prices to rise dramatically. Russia currently provides around 40% of Europe's gas and around 4% of the UK's gas. So high wholesale prices have pushed many energy suppliers out of the market in the UK, as smaller suppliers haven't been able to afford the high wholesale prices. Weather is another factor. So we had cold and prolonged winter conditions in Europe between 2020 and 2021, reducing supplies of natural gas. In the UK, we also experienced low winds and therefore less wind energy generation, which increased reliance on natural gas. We've also seen an increase in the overall demand for energy. So demand for gas has increased following recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the start of the pandemic, prices hit historical lows, but have gradually been bouncing back as business returns to normal. So traditionally, the cost of installing renewables has been a big barrier to uptake with subsidies and funding. However, the latest IPCC report predicts that globally, a shift to low carbon energy could save money overall due to the rapid cost reductions that we're seeing in low carbon technologies. In health and well-being terms, the social benefits of phasing out fossil fuels is a no-brainer, and it avoids the social damage from climate change impacts. Some studies have quantified these social gains. For example, a recent research paper analysed the costs and benefits to society of phasing out coal. They found that the world could reap a social gain of $77.89 trillion by phasing out coal. This represents around 1.2% of current world GDP every year until 2100. Crucially, renewable energy projects need to benefit the local people and economies by providing employment and clean energy provision, rather than following colonialist patterns of extraction, where energy is exported and labour and equipment imported with little benefit to the host country. So we can see that the energy system as it stands is broken. It's not fit for the climate resilient future which we need to build. So what can the cultural sector do to respond? We'll be covering some more top tips at the end of this webinar, but I'll cover these at a high level now. So firstly, applying the energy efficiency first principle. Do what you can to reduce energy demand and increase the energy efficiency of your buildings through behaviour change, monitoring and measuring, and technology upgrades. Then assess opportunities for renewables and heat pumps. Upskill and capacity build. So this is about investing in energy efficiency training and management for key staff. Lobbying. Make it clear to funders and policymakers that the sector needs further support to make the required transition at the required speed. Speak to your local MPs, partner with other cultural organisations in your locality to put pressure on decision makers. Build clean energy partnerships. We're going to be covering this later, so I'll just briefly mention it. But you can also consider opening your venue as a warm hub for those who can't afford to heat their homes this winter. And share what works. Sharing learning is really, really vital. Energy management and technology can be a complex area. So share what you learn, share what's working and what doesn't, so that the sector can transition more rapidly and can scale solutions. And finally, divest. Move your finances, so pensions, bank accounts and sponsorships, to ensure that your assets are supporting renewable energy rather than fossil fuel exploitation. Now, without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our first guest speaker. We've got James from Good Energy here. James, I'll leave you to introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name's James, obviously. I work at Good Energy. I look after all of our B2B and commercial customers. Let me just going to share my screen. Let's all just hope this works. I think I'll be better by now. Cool. Can we all see that? Good. I'll take the thumbs up, so yes. Cool. So there's a couple of little things I'd like to run through today. Going to give a quick sort of, not quick, but an industry update, a little bit of background on where we are, sort of how we've got here, some of the ways that Good Energy sets itself apart from other suppliers, and a bit of a model of some of the ways that energy systems should work in the UK going forward. And then sort of look into a couple of our what we call power partners, so the renewable generators that make up the portfolio that supply our Good Energy customers, and then sort of a couple of questions and bits and pieces that you could be asking your current supplier or different suppliers when sort of investigating sort of the true or how true the claims are that some other suppliers are making around their renewable energy portfolio. So just to start off, obviously, as Becky's already alluded to, and I'm sure everybody is aware, we're very much in the midst of a energy crisis within the UK at the moment, and it very much is a crisis. This all sort of kicked off back in September 2021. There was almost sort of a perfect storm of reasons why this came about. We had a particularly low wind output during sort of August into September of 2021. There was also an interconnector fire between the UK and France, which didn't help very much. And yeah, there's a couple of different factors that basically led into this. That's then sort of further been compounded by the Russia invasion of Ukraine. There's been continued unprecedented weather patterns as a result of climate change all across Europe. So there's been low nuclear output across some of our other European nations, caused by extreme heat waves, which means that European plants can't cool their systems adequately enough, which then puts further strain on the gas network across all of Europe. There's been somewhat of an inevitability about this crisis. I think off the back of COVID, that has been somewhat sped up. It's something that sort of has been described previously as the energy gap, which is basically as the UK's old nuclear fleet has started to diminish, and rightfully so, old coal-fired power stations have been decommissioned, this has very much led to an over-reliance on gas within the UK. Sadly, the energy price of energy in the UK is driven by gas. The reason for this is that the way that energy is priced is basically the last unit of electricity that is produced to meet demand makes up the energy price. And unfortunately, in the UK, that tends to be gas. And yeah, due to all the factors that Becky has outlined and myself just now, that price has been shot through the roof. I should probably give a bit of context as well around the fact that there has been sort of a lot of media attention on energy suppliers and producers over the last 12 months, and the majority of it rightfully so. However, there is a bit of a disparity between energy producers and suppliers, so smaller suppliers like Good Energy versus the likes of a fossil fuel supplier like someone like BP or Shell. It's BP and the producers and the people that are removing fossil fuels from the ground and then producing electricity generation from them are the ones that are very much seem to be profiteering from these situations. So it's worth just giving a little bit of context around energy suppliers and energy producers aren't necessarily always in the same boat. Certainly to combat this, we definitely need to diversify our fuel mix within the UK, remove that over-reliance on fossil fuels. It does appear that, yeah, market will still continue to be volatile as we move through this winter. Thankfully, over the last couple of weeks, about 8 weeks or so, market prices have actually been falling, which is good news. Sort of ironically, this is off the back of actually quite a mild October and a very mild start to November, has meant that people aren't consuming as much electricity as expected. People aren't also consuming as much heat as expected, which has meant that actually at this time the UK has quite a high gas storage, which has sort of pushed prices down and down. However, this very much is a short-term pattern. Should some colder weather come in at the end of this year and into next year, that will could very much easily go the other way. But thankfully, there's a market has been coming off in recent weeks, which is good. And there's also the cost of the failure of a few other suppliers that have gone bust over the last 12 months. That's basically pushed everybody's standing charges on their bills, a bit more of a domestic issue, but pushed standing charges on bills through the roof as other energy suppliers have to recover the cost of some of the cost that those other suppliers that went bust didn't meet. That actually does exclude Bulb at the moment because they're technically not bust. They are basically being managed by Ofgem at this time. If you need any more information, there are two fantastic posts on our blog that sort of go into detail of how we've got to where we are. Thankfully, the UK government has actually introduced the EBRS, which is the Energy Bill Relief Scheme. This should have appeared basically on everybody's bill for October consumption already and will last until the end of March 2023. It's actually quite a significant support package, and thankfully it has been brought in. The way that it's calculated is quite complex to understand, but basically you get a significant discount on the power element of what makes up your energy bill. So within the unit rates that you pay for electricity, there's about 15 or 16 different components that make up that unit rate. Power accounts for the majority of that, and it's actually a discount that's applied to that. The discounts do vary based on being on a fixed term tariff or a variable tariff, or if you're on an out of contract tariff, they do vary and it is quite complicated. But thankfully, and I'm not advocating for the government in any way, but this is it is a welcome relief, because I think, yeah, as I see day to day with some of our customers, yeah, this winter would have been absolutely horrendous without it. But I think even with this support, I think it's still going to be incredibly tricky for the majority of customers in the B2B space.
James, just a 1 minute warning.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise. Oh, crikey. Okay, that's I banged on a little bit there. So yeah, so just a couple of little bits and pieces around what makes Good Energy different. So one thing that I'd like to highlight is that when asking questions of your current supplier, it's really important that you just ask is that tariff 100% REGO backed? And the question we always get customers to ask is it PPA backed? So that stands for Power Purchase Agreement, which is basically the really important question to ask. And that means, is your supplier buying that power directly from renewable generation assets? So we buy from 1,700 independent generators all across the UK. That covers our entire portfolio requirement for business, domestic customers. Sorry, that 1 minute warning's sort of thrown me very slightly. So that covers off all of our requirements. So it's, instead of what other suppliers, what a lot of other suppliers can basically do, is you can go to market, purchase a unit of electricity, go to a renewable generation asset and just buy the certificate, add those two things together, and that counts as a unit of, or a megawatt hour of renewable electricity. However, we believe that's very much doing the bare minimum. So we never purchase any REGO certificates without the power as well. So it's making sure that, like Good Energy, your current supplier is investing and supporting in sort of ground level generation, which we think is really, it's really important. Sorry, I'll skip through a couple of bits because so there's just a couple of lists. You can sort of screenshot this or take it away or look on the recording, but these are a couple of the key questions that you really need to be asking your current supplier. So where is that generation based? Is that supplier actually helping increase the number of renewable generation assets on the grid? And there is a very short video that I'd like to play that sort of just highlights and sort of gives a bit of personality back to some of the people that actually do generate electricity. I think the media has done a pretty good job of bashing a lot of energy suppliers at the moment, but they're not all the same as the likes of Shell and BP and stuff. So if I could just play this video very shortly, hopefully that should give it
the idea to invest. I live on the Wick Estate, which has been in my family in the Vale of Evesham for over 250 years. And my life's ambition has been to turn this landscape and this land into a sort of living pastoral environment. I was standing down by the weir here one day when we'd had a lot of rain, and it was roaring over the weir, and one was just confronted, with this sort of raw natural power. And that sowed the germ of the idea to investigate trying to generate hydroelectricity from this water power. To link back into how we need to live in harmony with things in order to have a future, I think so important. In building the hydro where we did, we created a new leat here off the main drag of the river. It's much quieter. So we've had rarer wildfowl land here. And then it was only last year I was looking up the leat, and suddenly this otter's face appeared and looked at me, and it was just a magical moment. We've been with Good Energy since the beginning. I feel really happy working with a company whose ethics and morals and ambition and purpose are the same as mine. To have somebody who's taken the initiative and link us with the customer, it gives one a feeling of strength that together we are going to build a sustainable future.
Cool. Apologies, I had to rush through some of that stuff. I thought I had a little bit more time than I did, but hopefully that gives a little bit of context. Happy to provide those slides as well for anybody that wants to have a little look through. But hopefully gives a bit of context to that. Not all energy producers are the same, and there are sort of small independent power partners out there doing the right thing. So
thank you very much. It's really interesting, and we will have 15 minutes for questions after this. So if there's anything that came up there that you'd like to ask James more about, there is an opportunity. So post those questions in the Q&A function. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Atlanta. Atlanta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Becky. My name's Atlanta Cook. I'm the Communications Manager and Community Fund Manager at Brighton Energy Co-op. We're based in Brighton, funnily enough, and what we do is we basically get a big bunch of people together. We all put money in the pot and we buy large renewable solar energy infrastructure, and we create those projects on people's roofs They may be a school, a college, a university, or a business in our Sussex area. That's a community energy cooperative, sometimes referred to as community energy group, but it's the same thing. The principle is that when you club together, you can do really big things. You can make a difference by, just even a small kind of investment into a renewables project that's going to produce something locally that local people and the local economy will actually benefit from. So how it works is the money that we raise by selling the cheaper, cleaner electricity, solar electricity to, say, the school, college, university, business, the money raised then goes to pay 2% each year into our community fund, which I manage, which runs a solar education program for local schools. The money is then also used to pay interest on the investment that our members put into the pot. And we also repay that capital investment to our investors over the lifetime of the lease. So to really try and make it clear, because I know it can be confusing to understand how community energy groups and community energy cooperatives work, you're really just kind of clubbing together, buying the renewables, putting them where they're needed, and then the big benefit is that the school buys the cheaper electricity, so or college or business, they then benefit from lower electricity bills. They also benefit, and we all benefit from the reduced CO2 carbon emissions. So we see it as a bit of a win-win, because the money stays in the community. So that, say that the school pays less on its electricity bill, the money that they do pay goes into Brighton Energy Co-op. That money then pays interest to the people that invested, or if you like, ethically invested in the co-op itself. So that money stays within our local community. And their capital is repaid, over the course of the project. Once the lease is finished, we actually give the solar system to the business, school, college, and they can continue to use it themselves and just benefit fully from the extra electricity that we sell to the grid. If the school, business, college doesn't use it, they can then do that at the kind of end of our lease period. Now, I know that is a little bit complicated, a model maybe for people to understand, but on our brightonenergy.org.uk website, we have lots of different ways of sort of explaining that, and lots of visuals and graphics and things, especially our free solar for schools page. There's a short animation there where you can explain to somebody else, if you wanted to, how the free solar for schools work. The thing I wanted to tell you guys about, seeing as how your arts and culture organisations, was really the case study of Amberley Museum. So Amberley Museum in Sussex showcases and preserves the rural, transport, industrial and communications history of Southeast England. It's a fascinating place, lots of it's outdoors. It has some very, very big warehouses that contain, for example, the Milne Electricity Hall, where you can see all sorts of fantastic old large and small scale, domestic and large scale appliances. We gave them a 60 kilowatt solar system in March 2020, just before the restrictions. That saves them each year about £5,000 now that the electricity prices have gone up. So obviously they're a high consumption organisation. It saves 11 tonnes of CO2 from being emitted through their energy usage each year, and that's the equivalent of 1,591 trees, if you want to look at it in that way. The crucial bit, before I show you a very, very quick film of the place, so you can see the beautiful museum and our lovely solar system on their roof, is that because Brighton Energy Co-op clubbed together and paid for this system, they didn't pay for their solar energy system. They don't have to maintain and repair their solar energy system, but they do get to buy the cheap, clean electricity, solar electric that's produced. So they save on their bills and they reduce their carbon emissions. So we see that financial model, if you like, as a win-win situation for everyone. If you like, it's a sort of tenant landlord kind of arrangement. We kind of rent their roof, we put the solar system on it, we generate the electricity, and then they benefit from that, and we as a community and a world as the earth benefit from the carbon reductions, right? So I'm going to try and share my screen now in a non sort of techie glitchy way. I'm really hoping that it works, because I'd like to just show you this little film that we made just to share on our socials. Let me just see if that's going to work. Yep, hopefully. I'm sorry, that's gone really glitchy, hasn't it? It looks absolutely awful. That's okay, you can see that anyway. You can see that little film on our website anyway. I'm sorry, that was so glitchy, it just went all green. Essentially, it's just showing you the beautiful museum, the solar panels that are on top of their communications electricity hall. It's showing you the little railway that goes around the edge, and it's showing you that you know, if there is a big roof and high consumption and you've got a community energy group close to you, you're going to be able to maybe contact them and get yourself a system if that works for you and that would benefit you. So yeah, please have a look at brightonenergy.org.uk, and thank you very much for inviting us to Julie's Bicycles energy event.
Brilliant, thank you, Atlanta. That was really, really interesting. Vicky's just posted a link there to your video in the chat, so people can watch that in their own time after the webinar. So thank you also to James for that really interesting presentation. We've now got 15 minutes or thereabouts for your questions from the audience today. We've already got a couple that have come in, so I'm going to kick off with this first question. With funding cuts in the arts, a perfect storm of economic uncertainty, I wanted to ask whether renewable energy prices will come down to match the larger providers. The difference for large venues can be pretty massive, and the desire to be sustainable can't always match the need to balance budgets. James, can I ask you that question first, and then Atlanta, if you'd like to add anything afterwards?
Yeah, certainly. So I think, yeah, strictly talking from a business sense, I think the disparity between sort of truly renewable suppliers and other sort of fossil fuel led or mostly generated suppliers, there has been sort of disparities in the past, and they do sort of, that gap widens and contracts for a number of different reasons. I think frustratingly at the moment, as I mentioned, that because the price of electricity in the UK is still driven by a fossil fuel price, you have to offer renewable generators basically the same price as you would a gas generator, because all that energy goes into the same bucket and it's the same sort of marketplace. But I think what will be interesting to see over the next 12 months is where that disparity in price, where that comes from, or not where that comes from, sort of what that disparity sort of looks like. I think we've always been within 1% or 2% of suppliers that are more fossil fuel led. Certain suppliers like EDF and suppliers that have large scale generation of their own often come out quite significantly cheaper. But there is also a point, it's a very difficult sell to make, but if you take a supplier like Bulb, for example, who have now had to exit the marketplace, they claim to be a 100% renewable electricity supplier, continually sold electricity below the market price of electricity in order to gain lots of customers. They gained 1 million customers. Throughout the 5 or 6 years that they were active, they didn't turn a profit for any of those years, and now it looks like it's going to cost the taxpayer over 6 billion to have to bail out that supplier. So yeah, obviously we're very much aware that we are in a completely unprecedented energy market situation, but it is also sort of worth noting that, and obviously, yeah, the financial cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment is a massive factor as well. But sort of you do sort of make your choices with the money that you spend, and I think choosing a truly renewable supplier is the right thing to do. But obviously, I'm wholly aware that we are in a very tricky economic situation at the moment. But yeah, the disparity between renewable and generation suppliers and others shouldn't be too much. The reason Good Energy may be a touch more expensive at times is just we basically have a whole team that sits there, and their whole job is to go out, scan the marketplace and find small independent generators like the one we factored into that video. So there is a slight cost in doing that, and some of the ways that we run our business tend to be a touch more expensive than some of the larger suppliers. But that gap has been narrowing and narrowing. It's just sort of been, yeah, the marketplace has been blown open by the crisis, unfortunately.
That makes sense. Thank you, James. Atlanta, you presented quite a very different model there, and you used that really interesting case study of Amberley Museum. Do you work, what other kinds of organisations do you work with, and are some of those kind of large organisations, and what sort of other sectors have you partnered with?
Well, I wanted to sort of agree with James and say, you know, well put about the sort of bulb example. It's like, you know, how you invest your money, i.e. you're paying your electricity bill, is also an investment of money, is an ethical decision. And if you are able or unable to take that, that's obviously a personal decision, but it is a very important one. And likewise, you know, it's more expensive to do something well. It is always the case. And then Becky, your question there is really one of the better examples we've got at the moment is that we've just worked with Bolney Wine Estate, and we're just putting our biggest ever solar system on Rathfinny Wine Estate, who is in the B Corp application process to be, you know, the most sustainable wine estate in Sussex or whatever. They have high energy usage. They have big bottling sheds, processing sheds, like the museum, these you know, enormous roofs that we can get these bigger systems on. Obviously, the more we can generate from a partnership, the better it is for us. But if we can also generate you know, enough for, say, a school that has smaller, not quite so flat roofs, we will subsidise those smaller, not quite so flat roofs, because we will want the school to have solar electricity, and we will want to help our local school to reduce its energy bills and its CO2 emissions. And so, as James put it, we're doing something very different to the mainstream major fossil fuel industry companies. We are trying to keep, you know, our profits in the local economy, the benefits in the local economy. You know, the community, the people within our community who invest in these solar projects are the ones getting the interest, are getting their capital repaid to them. Other examples of organisations, huge compost making facility we've just recently given a £25,000 grant to via our EU funded ERDF solar scheme, which is also on our website. There's a £25,000 grant that people can do an expression for interest for, and that's for a solar system and a EV charger, not just an EV charger. It has to be a solar system and or sort of thing. And so a real variety of organisations. It's really that there's a high consumption and that there's a large roof, south facing preferably, and then we can hopefully work with that organisation.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really informative. There's been a few questions in the chat that have asked around how many different community energy cooperatives are there in the UK, and what do you do if there's not one in your area? Right, yeah, there's absolutely loads. You can just go onto Community Energy England website to see a map. If you can't find one locally or sort of within your kind of county, I would be surprised right now, because it's very, very widespread across the UK.
But if you can't find a community energy group, you might consider finding some people that want to set one up, because we also share our kind of transparent and open source with our modelling, with our business plans, with how the PPAs that James mentioned work. You know, there's also that ability for community organising. And I suppose the next best thing is to choose a 100% renewables energy supplier if you can't find one closer to you. And as you said earlier, Becky, to look at your energy efficiency measures in your organisation.
Yeah, if there's a second thing that I can add to that as well, I think obviously, yeah, we are in the depths of an energy crisis at the moment, but sometimes out of this crisis, it does change the way in which we've worked. Good Energy has had to adapt during this time, and basically what we're doing now is for any of our larger industrial and commercial customers, so some of the theatres that are members of Julie's Spartan and stuff, we are effectively netting those customers off on a one-to-one basis against renewable generation assets. So all the way through all of our systems, those two suppliers are intrinsically linked. Obviously, that energy isn't coming from the solar farm right to your door, but in terms of matching those supplies up on a one-to-one basis, it means there's less market exposure for Good Energy, which is great. It also helps double down on some of that CSR policy and some of the obviously, yeah, Good Energy can be a touch more expensive, but if it can help support some of that CSR policy that adds value to your business, then we're happy to reach out and add case studies and bits and pieces like that. So yeah, it's a lot harder work for us to net these off on a one-to-one basis, but yeah, sometimes out of these tricky times, there are actually sort of benefits that do come through and changes in the way that we work.
Brilliant, thank you. We've almost run out of time for questions, so maybe just to wrap up, could you both maybe just say what could the UK government do to support renewable energy markets following on from COP27 in your opinion? We'll start with Atlanta. Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, we said we'd do that, didn't we, earlier? Well, the feed-in tariff was a very useful system that ended fairly recently, that really changed the dynamics of the way that we model create our financial model. They ended the FITS system. They could reintroduce something similar to that again to encourage more and more people to set up community energy companies, for example. It obviously made it a lot easier for everyone back then, and I expect James may have some extra to put into that.
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the major things that certainly needs to happen, and I know is under consultation at the moment, is just, oh, sorry, someone's calling me, is that we need to decouple the renewable energy market from the gas energy market. So even if the UK energy system had 99% renewables on it, if the most expensive part of that was a unit of gas and that made up the last 1%, we'd still all be paying the price of that gas unit. So there does need to be a decoupling there, and yeah, just continued investing and funds for yeah, especially stuff like onshore wind, for example, and yeah, that's certainly the number one thing that needs to, just decoupling those two markets would significantly help. So yeah, we're not being penalised for having an over-reliance on gas. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Thank you both very much for those presentations and sharing your thoughts and the questions with the audience. We're just going to finish off now by sharing a couple of case studies from the arts and cultural sector. And I'll just finalise also with some top tips, which you can read more about in our energy report. So I wanted to use Glyndebourne Opera as a case study. So they built their own wind turbine back in 2012. Within 6 years, that wind turbine paid for itself, and it continues to create profit and provide energy security for the organisation. So between 2012 and 2021, it generated the equivalent of 105% of the electricity used by the company in that period, which resulted in their emissions falling by 50% carbon emissions. They've also undertaken a number of other activities aimed at reducing energy consumption. So that includes installation of new efficient gas boilers, reducing gas by 20%, and making changes to the air conditioning system to lower energy consumption, replacing their auditorium lights with LEDs, and installing light timers and sensors. So it's quite a comprehensive approach and way of managing their energy. Another case study, Knowles West Media Centre. They worked with the Bristol Energy Cooperative to install solar on their roof. So the Bristol Energy Cooperative carried out the feasibility checks, the structural surveys, the grid application, and the planning approvals. The cost of the installation was covered, and the electricity is sold back to them at a reduced rate, so the system can be brought back after 3 or more years. There are plenty of other case studies in our energy report, so do make sure you have a look at those on our webpage. We've got quite a range of organisations covered in there. But just to finally summarise for today, I just wanted to share, we've got a 2-pager of top tips for arts and cultural organisations to start taking action on their energy impacts. So I'll just pick out a few of these to share with you to finish off the session today. So I'd really recommend to start off by getting control of your data. So that using half-hourly metering is the best way to understand your energy use to begin with, and start to understand where the opportunities are to save energy. You can build on that with an energy audit. So by using a qualified energy assessor who will be able to create a bespoke report and recommendations for your building and your setup. Hiring a dedicated energy manager and recruiting energy champions can help to drive your energy management plan forward and build a culture of energy awareness within your organisation. So support your champions and your key staff with energy efficiency training can also really help with that. Setting number 7 there, setting science-based targets. That's about aligning your energy reduction targets to international climate targets. And that can help give your strategy credibility and strengthen your overall strategy. A good example of energy management are the organisations that we have involved in the Arts Council England Spotlight programme. So that's 30 large MPOs who are working on improvements to environmental literacy, strategy and expertise to agree achievable yet ambitious energy impact reduction objectives, or EROs. They're also creating governance frameworks that help them to support achieving those objectives. And it's really helping to benefit the long-term resilience of those organisations. A key part of the programme is also creating opportunities for organisations to share best practice, knowledge and experiences, which will enable them to individually and as a sector as a whole to help achieve those environmental reductions. The programme follows the principles of good energy management as set out in ISO 5001. So you can read more about Spotlight on our webpage and about some of the organisations that are involved. But just a reminder, you can read about all of this in more detail in our energy report. So that just leaves me to give a really big thank you to you all for joining us this morning. A really big thank you to Atlanta and James also for your contributions today. So we will be sharing the recording of the webinar via email, and we'll also be uploading it onto our webpage once it's ready. So thank you very much.